Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, and today we'll be diving into Java Mapstruct, this is the tool we use usually to map Java beans and Java object. So before we start, if you like my content, please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button for the video. Thank you. So let's get started. First of all, why do we need a Java Mapstruct? Why do you need a tool to map two objects in Java? So one of the use case you may be facing during your professional life is to imagine if you have an HTTP request that having like inbound object, which is like a DTO, and then you want to map it to a database object, which is an entity, which these two objects are a little bit different. So before saving the object that you are receiving from the HTTP request, you want to map it to the database object. So this is one of the use case you may need Mapstruct. So without any further ado, let's get started and see all of this in the code. So now, what are we going to build? Actually, we are going to build a backend application that receive an object, map it to a new object, and then return the mapped object. We will create a REST controller application and with the Java Spring. For that, we are going to head to Spring Initiator and try to have some dependency. Here we're gonna need only a Spring Web, Lombok, and then you generate a zip, and then try to open it, like for example with NTDJ. So here we have our application, which is demo application, a simple one, and we are trying to create the object that we need. First of all, we are going to need the object that we need, which are, call it a product here. So our product will have a private ID, integer ID. It will have a private string. Let's give it a name, and then we'll have a private integer price, for example. Okay. For that, we will be needing the annotation lombox, which are data. That gives you all the getters, setters, toStrings, and everything. We're gonna need also, for the sake of this argument, we're gonna need a no constructor argument, and we are going to need all argument constructor. Okay, that's good. Now we need to create another product, which is, let's call it product mapped, and just for the first example, we're gonna use the same field, and then we're gonna dive into a more complex use case. So it will be almost the same object. Okay, and the next one will be trying to create the controller. Let's call it a web layer, and create, let's map struct controller. Okay, so as we saw, we are creating REST controller, so we are going to need the REST controller, and then we are going to use, as we saw in the last video, that we need the request mapping, which contain this one. Okay, so we are going also to need, of course, the put mapping, which our application return a response entity of type product mapped. Let's call it put a mapped product, which will need a request body, of course, which type of product mapped. Let's call it product mapped, and with that we will, let's say, return, just for the sake of the example, a response entity of type product mapped. Yes, let's return it this one, sorry. Okay, and then return just a new product mapped, just for the sake of the example. Before that, we will be sending, so just to test it, we'll be sending product mapped, and we will, I'm sorry, here request body, we're gonna need the product, not product mapped. A product, and then returning an empty product mapper, and then we're gonna implement the application. So let's try it. Here we are sending the application is up and running. Let's head to Postman to test it. Okay, so here Postman, we have here Postman opened. So here we have our application, which is like ID, name, price. We tried to send it, and then we received a null object, which is normal because we created here an empty product. So let's try to add it and create the mapper. For that, we will be needing a mapper. Let's create it as an interface. I'm sorry, here, okay, so here we're gonna create an interface. Let's call it a product mapper, okay, which is good. And then we are going to add all the dependency into Maven about the product mapper. And also here, we will be using in the path, here if you go down, scroll down, here we'll be adding the Mapstruct, okay? So just to give a summary, here we added the Mapstruct dependency, and in plugin we added this one, which is path, to add Mapstruct. So here we are ready to use it. If we go back to our mapper and try to add some annotation, let's create @mapper from Mapstruct, and what we need here is to add just component, components model, and we are using here, let's call it Spring. It's not called, this is what you should be calling it. For that, we will be needing to define an application, and then we're gonna use like here, define the function that return a product map. Let's call it map, and then it will take a product as an entry. And that's it. So here we have our mapper implemented. So let's go to Maven. Let's try to do a clean. Let's stop our application. Let's stop everything. Stop all the applications. Let's do a clean to our project and try to install everything. Okay, so the build is successful. If we go here to implementation, we can see that this is auto-generated code generated by Mapstruct here, and here we have our mapper. First of all, we check if the product we are giving is null, and if it's not null, we initiate a new product, and then we map all the object. Actually, what's happening behind the need, each field that has the same name and type into the product will be mapped automatically to the product map. So you don't have to do anything. For that, let's test our mapper into action. First of all, let's try to inject it. Private, let's product mapper. Let's call it product mapper. Let's put it as final. And here try to add all arguments, okay? And here let's try to use it. And to use it, it's very easy. Let's call product mapper, call our function map, and pass it the product. And that's it. Let's create var and have a product mapped. And for that, let's just return, instead of returning the empty product, let's return the product mapped. Okay, sounds good. Let's come here and try to do this one. Another time we are sending this tools and try, yes, we need to start our application, of course. So Our application is up and running, and try to do it, and you can see here you getting the mapped object. Okay, let's try, for example, and send another ID with, let's say we are sending an iPhone, and the cost is $1,000. So let's get it, and here we are getting the product mapped. So this is the first use case that we'll be using. Okay, so imagine that in the product that you are sending, you have another field, which is a string. Let's call it store. Let's call it store, for example. And then into the mapped object, the store does not have the same name. Let's call it store product, for example, just for the sake of the example. So here we have store product, and here we have a store, for example. What's going to happen if we try to do a clean install to it and go back here? We have a build successful, go to our application, and you can see that this object is not mapped. So how can we map this field that does not have the same? So in Mapstruct is pretty easy. All we have to do when we come here to map our function, and just to use the annotation mapping of Mapstruct, and say, for example, the target that we want is the store, and what we want is the source is, for example, let's say the store is a store product, and put this one between brackets. So what we are saying is, into the source, which is a product, here, this one will be the store product, since this is a target, and the source is store. So what we are saying is, in the product, take the store and map it with product store. Okay, so let's do a clean install to it and try to install it. So our build is successful. Let's go to our mapper and see how the generated code is handling this. So here we get the product, get stores, and he set it to store product. Okay, let's try to launch our application and try to test it. So in our product here, we're gonna need a new field which called store, and let's give it like, for example, Apple Store. Okay, so let's send it. And here we have store, Apple Store, and then we are seeing that this field is mapped with the new one. This is another use case. Okay, so I have another use case for you. Imagine if in a product here we have, let's say, for example, a private string. Let's call it category, for example. Okay, you have a category, and you want, for example, to map this one into product, but you want to map it as a constant. How can you do it? To do that, you can come to the mapper, and here adding the same mapping, okay, and then you specify the target, which is okay. So I'm sorry, just changing for our use case here. Let's say the product does not have the field, but the mapped product need this field. Is the other way around. I'm sorry. So here the target will be, if we come here, so let's score it, just remember category, and yes, let's not forget the C, and for that the constant will be, let's call it for example category like mobile phone. Okay, so we have mobile phone. Let's stop our application, try to do a clean and install. And here, if we go back to our mapper and go to the implementation, and we can see that for the category we are setting it as a constant called mobile phone. So let's try to run our application and try to retest this. Here, let's say for example we are not sending anything, and try to do the same one. And here we have our new field category with the constant. So let's just give a resume of what we just saw. First of all, what we did, we create our controller with a put function that receive a product and map it into our mapper. First of all, we saw how we can add it. The first thing you have to do is to add the dependency, which are first of all are the Mapstruct, this dependency, and then you add it into the path for annotation processor to be able to use it. And into the mapper here we created just a simple interface that we annotated with @mapper and use it as a string application. And for that we create just this map, this function. This one will be mapping all the field that has the same name. And then we took an example which is to map two fields that doesn't have the same name, and we saw another use case which is mapping a field with a constant in case we don't have this field and you need to fill because it has, for example, a null verification. So mainly this is what we saw. This is a very basic introduction to Mapstruct. I hope you learned something. I will try to leave into the description some resources if you want to go deeper to see more about the Mapstruct, which I will strongly advise you. So that will be all for today. I hope you learned something and see you in the next video. Thank you.